Welcome back to Happy Hour, sponsored by SRG Financial Advisors, home of the Mile Marker Club. I'm DJ Kyle, and we have a special guest. We have Jim Pasley with us, our history guru. And Jim, I'm very excited about having you on today.
I'm tickled to death to be here.
So
great working with you.
Here's the thing. I got back on, we had a vacation to Germany. Went to Germany, went to Berlin, and the history of Berlin. You just walk around and you're just taking pictures and you're seeing all these things that you've seen on news and, you know, in history books and whatever. But here's the thing, Jim. I didn't pay attention to history when I was in high school. I did just enough to get my grades, but sometimes I would learn about something and not quite learn about it. Mm-hmm. And when we went to Berlin and we saw the Berlin Wall, of course, you know, everyone's there taking pictures. We're taking pictures and videos and looking at this thing that is such a piece of history. And I was going, I'm not really sure if I know a whole lot about the Berlin Wall. I remember I was, old enough to remember when Ronald Reagan gave a speech and said, Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And I remember watching the wall come down. And as a kid, I was like, I don't get why are they so excited about tearing down a wall? Mm-hmm. So I'm glad that we have you on the show today to talk about the Berlin Wall. And another thing that I want to share with you, I actually have a piece of the Berlin Wall that we got while we were in Berlin. Great. So I brought that back, and here's the certification that says that it really is a real piece of the Berlin Wall. So Let's talk about this piece of history and how it plays a role in our lives.
All right. Well, here we go. It's a fascinating story. And by the way, if you want to see what that wall looks like and you don't want to make the expense of going all the way over there, there's a huge section of that Berlin Wall in Fulton. In Fulton, Missouri, there at the Churchill Library.
And it's so got like the cutout of the people. Yeah, I think that's a neat one.
It's really cool. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about this. And this don't feel bad. You know, when I was in high school, history was not my favorite either. You had to memorize all those names and dates, and who cares? They're all dead anyhow.
But now
right?
it's like I want to know. Like back then, it was this is just something in a book. But
is this going to be on the test?
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
I just want to learn it for the test and then be done with it.
So the nice thing here is there's not going to be a quiz. Okay, so sit back and relax. And then what I used to tell my students, just listen to the story. The story, that's what's really fascinating about history, is its stories. And when you look at it from that standpoint, you can remember a lot of it. Mm-hmm. So let's go all the way back to 1948, all right? Now, as we come to the end of World War II, they had a problem. They had to decide, what are we going to do with Germany? Because Germany's going to lose this thing. They lost, and now we've got this country. We're going to have to divide everything up amongst the winners. Now there were people like France said, let's just do away with Germany. Let's make it go away. We'll just divide the whole thing up and we'll be done with it. You can't do that. You know, I mean, it's a big industrial base and everything. And, what about all the people that are there? So what they decided to do is they said, we're going to take Germany itself and we're going to divide it into 4 sections. So imagine, if you will, the whole country and dividing it up into 4 equal sections. And you had France, England, the United States, and the Soviet Union. Each got a piece. Okay. All right? Now, with that, when you had those 4 sections, they had another problem in the fact that Berlin, which was the capital of Germany, fell in the middle of the Soviet section, the Russian section. Okay. It's all by itself. It's like a little island sitting up there in the corner. Yeah. Okay? And so you have basically these 4 sections, and within it you had Berlin, and they said, okay, what are we going to do with that? And they talked back and forth trying to decide what to do, and they finally couldn't come to an agreement, and they said, we'll take the city itself and do the same thing. We'll divide it into 4 sections. So the city of Berlin actually had a French section, a U.S. section, a British section, and a Soviet section. Okay. All right? So you have the big section, the big country divided into 4, and then this little island up here divided into 4. Now here's the thing. The island is sitting in the Soviet section, and the Soviets are like, we don't like the idea of having a city of 3 million people with 3/4 of them answering to the French and the British and the U.S. And eventually they said, we're not going to have that. And so what they did is the Soviets cut off all the roads, all the railroads, and everything into the city. and said, absolutely, we're going to starve them out until the British, French, and U.S. give us the other part of the city. And we didn't have any way to supply the city. They didn't have any food, didn't have any coal or anything coming in. And so we decided that we're going to do it by air. And this is the famous Berlin airlift you hear about, okay? So what happens is they start flying in everything that a city of 3 million people needs to survive.
Which is a lot of flying in,
That's a lot of flying in. I mean, it's huge amount of the effort to do this. And bear in mind, they loaded planes up with coal because everybody's home was heated with coal as well. And they had planes that literally traveled there and offloaded coal so people could heat their homes.
Wow.
Everything, food, you name it, all right? Now, what happened is this airlift was very successful. I mean, we hauled in about 2.3 million tons of cargo.
Wow.
I mean, I think there was something like, it was like 300,000 flights. Now, here's the thing. Berlin is this little island, and it had its own airport. And so we're flying the stuff into the airport. Now, we can't get there by road or by rail.
Because that's all cut off.
It's all cut off. Well, we were so successful in doing that eventually the Soviets said, it's not going to work. You know, they're just going to keep bringing this stuff.
Yeah.
And so they sat there and said, well, fine. And so the Soviets said, go ahead and open the roads and the railroads back up, all right? But this is, like I say, after we had spent all this money and effort of trying to supply all these supplies. Like I say, 2.3 million tons of stuff, all right? Now, what we saw happen then is even though Berlin is located, you know, within the Soviet part of the country, it's 100 miles from the border with the other 3 sections, okay?
Okay.
And so what we see eventually happen is that the French, U.S., and British sections combined together. Now look at the big country. They combined together and created West Germany. Those 3 sections combined together and made West Germany.
I see.
The section that was up in the corner over here becomes East Germany. All right?
Yeah.
So you basically got kind of a Pac-Man thing with this little
So there's always that dot there in the middle.
Yes, exactly. So what happens is the Soviets are still not happy. They don't like the whole idea of this whole thing.
Nothing can make them happy.
Right. Now, the people that are living in East Germany, they hate being under Soviet rule. It's a socialist society, it's terrible, and they're hearing about what's happening in West Germany where it's all capitalist and people have cars and food and you know, everything going great, all right? Well, they want to get out of the Soviet sector.
Gotcha.
And the only way they can do that is to go to Berlin and get into the western part of Berlin, West Berlin. You had East Berlin and West Berlin, because in Berlin they combined all that together, okay? The western part, and then the eastern part was controlled by the Soviets. Well, people started coming across into Berlin where they could get on a plane because they had an airport, and they could fly out of Berlin to West Germany. That's how they're getting their freedom.
Gotcha.
All right? And literally hundreds of thousands of people are leaving the Soviet section of Germany and going to Berlin, the little island, and flying over to the west part.
I see.
Okay?
So that's their way out.
So think about it today if you've got Camden County and you divided it into 4 sections, and Camdenton fell into the Soviet section, and it has an airport, okay? Well, what happened was people were like fleeing from the other parts of Camden County to get to the airport so they could get the heck out.
So they can get out, yeah.
Makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so what happens is the Soviets are sitting there thinking, man, you know, these guys are persistent if nothing else. And so what they decided to do is that's when they decided to build this wall, all right? Now, like I say, when I first started studying it, you know, years ago in high school, it didn't make much sense to me. I thought one big long wall, like the Great Wall of China.
Yeah, that's kind of what I pictured.
But instead, what this is, it's a wall around the city of Berlin. It's a circle. The wall is a circle.
So that Pac-Man that you were talking about, this is so it's a round wall.
The wall was built to keep the people from getting into Berlin so that they get on a plane and fly out.
Huh.
So it's not a straight wall. It's a
Yeah.
wall basically keeping the people of West Berlin in.
To access that airport.
And to keep everybody around them from getting in there so they can fly out.
Gotcha. Huh.
Isn't that something?
So wow, yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Now-
now it makes a little bit more sense
Yeah.
to me that
And what's fascinating is that when they did this, they turned around and decided, okay, we've got to stop this, because the people that are leaving are doctors and lawyers and engineers. They're the people who said this is not good living
Yeah.
in Soviet rule, you know, and we can't even utilize our talents at all. So they turned around and they're fleeing like crazy. And finally, the Soviets said, we're going to build a wall around this thing. Now, here's the bad part about it, okay? The bad part is just like we're sitting here in your studio right now. When you go to leave to go home, what would you do if when you left here and went home to your family, you can't get there? Because while we've been in here, somebody put a wall around where you live.
Huh.
All right.
So
now,
it was that quick. It wasn't like we're
Instantaneously.
planning this wall here in the next 2 or 3 months. We plan to have it built.
And here's the thing, you know, it wasn't really a wall to start. What it was is overnight, the Soviet troops came in and they stretched barbed wire and set up machine gun nests and everything around the whole perimeter of West Berlin. So if you had kids at a friend's house spending the night tonight with their friends, if they happen to be on the other side of that street 2 blocks away,
Yeah.
you don't get to see your kids again until they're 40.
Wow.
Right.
Wow, that is crazy to think. Because I never knew that. I always just thought, well, the Berlin Wall was something that, you know, how all construction works. It
Right.
takes a while to get there.
Yeah, you know, and so they basically hemmed in that city and locked it down to where nobody could get in or out of it. Okay, now, like I say, they still have their airport.
Yeah.
Okay, but they've locked this whole city down, and so we see that people are trying still to flee across that wall.
Yeah.
Because as you see here, you know, they eventually made it more permanent. And they had, you know, it was actually 2 walls. They built one and then another one here, and there was a no man's land in between.
Yeah.
And machine gun nests and everything. So people for years tried to get across. And, you know, probably about 500 people died.
Wow.
Trying. Some people were successful. They managed to get through the sewers, or they jumped out windows where apartment buildings were up close to the wall, that sort of thing. But it was just beyond comprehension, you know, that here you've got this, in modern times, you've got people that are
Yeah.
hemmed in an entire city. And so we see, you know, jumping all the way forward, what we see happen is that we come to 1961, and this is where you were talking to me earlier about, everybody remembers Ronald Reagan say, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what the wall was all about, okay? And so what we see is that in 1961, when we saw this with Reagan and them pushing to tear down the wall, there were about 1,000 East Germans fleeing on a regular basis, trying to get to the other side, okay? And in August of '61, is when the Russians built this wall.
Yeah.
In August of '61, okay? And this became the famous Berlin Wall, all
Yeah.
right? And so we sit there and look at it, and it's hard for us to comprehend, but from '61 until 1989,
Yeah.
from '61 to '89, bear in mind, your 5-year-old's over there at a friend's house.
And they
Okay.
can't get back home now.
Can't get back home.
Wow.
All right? And so now what happens is Gorbachev comes in with his idea of, they called it glasnost, okay, and openness, and he's doing what he can to diplomatically bring Russia into the rest of the world. And eventually, with all the pressure from the U.S. and from Reagan, they're saying, tear down this wall. They were successful in getting the Soviets to finally say, you know what,
Enough is enough.
Enough's enough.
Yeah.
And they said, we're going to let people cross through the openings. And that opened up Pandora's box. Then here comes everybody flooding across the wall. And this is where they start tearing chunks of it down and opens the whole thing back up to where then you wind up with Berlin being totally free of this oppression by the Soviet sector.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
Jim, thank you so much.
You bet.
I've learned so much in this just few moments that I feel like I missed out on when I was in high school trying to learn it, you know?
Isn't it fascinating too that I find it hard to comprehend what that would have been like?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The fear, the oppression,
and just being in a city of that many people and know that you're completely surrounded.
Yep.
There's
Can't
no
go
way
anywhere.
no way to get out other than to get on a plane and fly out. And you're completely surrounded. And to have it last that long, you know, when you go from 61 to 89, I mean, there's people who hadn't seen their parents, and your parents died while they were gone. You know, they're a block away.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You know,
but you still can't see them.
It is just beyond anybody's comprehension of what that had to be like.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I'm so jealous. I've been to Europe, but I didn't get to Berlin. It's still on my bucket list, but that's one of the places I'd love to go just because of that history.
Yeah.
Just to look at it and say, wow, and talk about stories. Think how many of those people who were in West Berlin, the stories that they probably have about being separated from everybody.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You know,
that is just mind-boggling.
Yeah, like I say, it'd be like living in Camden and not being able to go anywhere else in Missouri.
Yeah, just stuck. No vacations.
Right.
No summer nights out or anything like that.
Exactly.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for bringing this story to life for all of us.
You bet.
And I look forward to more conversations with you. I feel like I could just sit here and chat all day long.
I'm planning on it. You bet.
Well, thank you again for coming on the show. More Happy Hour coming up right after this.